I'm honored to speak with you today. Let me just start by thanking all the incredible individuals associated with the foundation, from its leadership to its board, to staff and volunteers, doctors, researchers, industry, and last but never least, my inspiring fellow cholangio warriors and their caregivers. Given the choice, I'm sure that most, if not all of us patients, might wish to be any place but here and facing any other challenge than this disease. But life has a funny way of taking us on unexpected and difficult journeys which allow us to figure out what really matters. Before my diagnosis in March 2021, I'd spent most of my life working on some of the world's most intractable conflicts. Back in '94, I was sent by the United Nations to Rwanda for a year to investigate the genocide. Then the US State Department sent me to Bosnia and Herzegovina to report on human rights in the wake of the Yugoslav War. For a decade after that, I worked on countries in Asia and Africa for the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. And in 2009, I moved to China for several years, working on conflict issues all over the region, often with my young son in tow. I always seemed to find myself in the countries that were the most challenging and closed off. Places like North Korea, Iran, Zimbabwe, Myanmar, or Burma. So you would think that I would be practiced at difficult journeys. Eventually, expecting to settle down and have a bit more stability, I ended up in Washington, D.C., and then New York City. But a bit over 2 years ago, this health-conscious yogi, cyclist, runner, hiker, and diver was diagnosed with advanced intrahepatic cholangiocarcinoma with an unresectable liver tumor of 11 by 8 centimeters with vascular invasion and lymph node metastasis. After getting my head around cholangio what? I began to suspect that this might be the most arduous journey of my life, a journey into the most uncertain of places. As I traveled to cholangioland, I made a conscious decision to treat this unfamiliar territory as I had dealt with previous voyages. I began by mapping out my route and identifying my flight plan. But instead of boarding an airplane at JFK, I took the New York City subway to MSK. And instead of a visa for my passport, I was given a medical record number. Instead of packing my suitcase with clothes, I packed it with a heating blanket, numbing cream for my port, and chemo snacks and games. And instead of learning Mandarin Chinese, I studied terms like fibroblast, growth factor receptor, biomarkers, T cells, as well as various foreign-sounding pharmaceutical names that now roll off my tongue, like the durvalumab Imfinzi that was added to my gemcitabine and cisplatin infusions after a year and a half, the Neulasta shot given at the end of each cycle, and then the pemigatinib Pemazir that I started in December 2022 after my tumor progressed on gemcis-durva. The flight plan now is to continue with Pemi and to add targeted high-dose radiation to the liver tumor and lymph nodes. Not only has pemigatinib shrunk my tumor to its smallest size to date of 7 by 4 centimeters, but it has been quite the gift of freedom in comparison with 2 long years of chemo infusions. If I may, I'd like to share a few things I have learned on my journey that have made a difference for me, as well as a few reflections on what has increased my quality and enjoyment of life, not just the quantity of it. My first realization is about change. In all my trips abroad, I've had a steep learning curve, not only with regard to languages and culture, but also in terms of travel plans constantly getting upended. This cholangioland journey has been no different, with constant disruptions caused by all manner of things. From intestinal blockages, to abnormal blood counts, to neutropenic fevers, to ER visits, and the like, which brings me to the universal truth that everything changes. And while we can't control many of these changes, we do get to choose how we respond and how we live with them. Throughout my journey in cholangioland, I have therefore tried to distinguish between the fact that I have cancer, which I have little control over, and all the ways in which I can exercise my own volition in light of that fact. Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor and author of Man's Search for Meaning, wrote, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and freedom." So with regard to my cancer journey, first, I accept the stimulus. I have cholangiocarcinoma. And second, I get to choose how I will respond, how I will live with this illness. I'm reminded of so many travel hiccups that required me to accept an unwelcome stimulus and then choose to respond. For instance, when I accidentally got locked inside the Kigali Central Prison during a routine visit, and knowing that any radio call to the UN office might set off a crisis with the government, I just waited with the prisoners, chatting and laughing together until early evening when the warden finally returned. Or when our North Korean guide didn't show up as planned to accompany my son and I across the China-North Korea border, and we calmly made our way across with the help of the border guards and fellow travelers with whom we had struck up conversations, and we ended up gleaning a lot of useful information for our onward journey. Meanwhile, back in Cholangioland, the stimuli are constantly changing, so the choices I make also constantly change as my journey progresses. I just keep aiming for the highest and best expression of myself, paying close attention to how cancer affects not just my body, but in that space between stimulus and response, my mind and spirit as well. Which leads to my next reflection about gratitude. I've got a really dry mouth thanks to pemigatinib right now, so. Every time I received chemotherapy, I did a simple practice, which I now do when I take my pemigatinib. I send thanks to all the people who have contributed to the development and distribution of these medicines. From the scientists, researchers, doctors, nurses, donors, trial participants, and pharmacy company executives, all the way down to the workers who mined the raw materials and those in the supply chain that got them to MSK. In short, I appreciate all that has happened along the way to ensure that these medicines arrive just when they are needed to interact with my body. Another aspect of gratitude is that I never expected to find so much beauty in illness. Of course, at times I feel completely overwhelmed, but when I slow down, I can see that there's beauty in my vulnerability, in my dependence on others, in the community that I've created, and in connecting with the caring souls inside our medical institutions. There's been unexpected celebration as well. A huge green party in the MSK chemo suite on the occasion of my 50th GemCis infusion. Our annual New York City Marathon gatherings to cheer on our CCF runners, including my best friend from college, and the joy of reconnecting with everyone here every year. There's also beauty and gratitude for the ways that my body has served me and its incredible ability to heal. There's beauty in my rich relationships with loved ones, and there's beauty in continuing my work of service in the world as long as my health permits. The courage, resilience, and generosity that I have witnessed in traveling through Cholangioland has been every bit inspiring as the unexpected love, grace, and hope that I encountered in my professional life in the darkest of situations, in prison cells, at massacre sites, in bombed-out buildings. Even as survivors recounted to me some of the most vulnerable and terrifying parts of their lives. As I sit with these ever-intertwining emotions of joy and pain, a greater peace has developed. Desmond Tutu said, "Discovering more joy does not save us from the inevitability of hardship and heartbreak. In fact, we may cry more easily, but we will laugh more easily too. Perhaps we are just more alive. Yet, as we discover more joy, we can face suffering in a way that ennobles rather than embitters. We have hardship without becoming hard. We have heartbreaks without being broken." To me, this is a meaningful template for how to thrive in the tangle of beauty and pain of this cholangiocarcinoma journey. But of course, when I've been in the grips of that 10 out of 10 pain or uncontrollable itching, that's almost worse than pain. It's been nearly impossible to practice gratitude. Who am I kidding? The best I can do in those moments is to try to sort out the physical pain from any additional pain I'm inflicting through my fear, anxiety, and spiraling thoughts. The usual ones like, what if this pain gets worse? What if it never ends? Is that a new met? The Stoics refer to this self-imposed additional pain as, quote, suffering twice, while Buddhists term it, quote, a second arrow. When I start to exacerbate my own pain through rumination, what psychologist Kristen Neff terms, quote, suffering equals pain times resistance, Meditation helps me to observe my thoughts and not over-identify or get swept away by them. That is why meditation has been almost as key to my journey in Cholangioland as my passport is for travel abroad. Indeed, brain scans confirm that meditation helps soothe the brain patterns underlying pain, and over time, these changes take root and alter the structure of the brain in a process called neuroplasticity, so that the pain is no longer felt with the same intensity. Not only does this turn down the volume control on pain, but creates just a little bit more space that allows me to remember that I'm not alone in my suffering, that so many others in our country and around the world are going through difficulty, even in that exact same moment, and I can send compassion to them along with myself. This is also why the question, why me, has never resonated. For me, it's always been, why not me? Letting my mind succumb to the fear and unpredictability of this cancer would deny me the quality of life that I have yet to live. I'd like to close by sharing with you my most important realization of this 2-year and counting journey. I'm not dying until I'm actually dying. And we get to be 100% alive until we are 100% dead. And spoiler alert, no one knows when they're gonna die, and everyone here is terminal. No one gets out of this wild and precious life alive. So the process of dying for all of us can be, if we choose, about living well. And for me, living well is very much about our connection with others. One of the world's longest studies of adult life, the Harvard experiment on adult development, confirms that our deep relationships with loved ones and community not only contribute to healthy and happier lives, but are universally invoked on people's deathbeds as the most important aspect of their lives. Being fully alive for me means prioritizing quality over quantity of life, which over these last 2 years has translated into spending time with loved ones and family of all kinds, doing the things that are most meaningful to us, whether in the US or on various trips abroad. We've been to about a dozen countries during my chemo breaks, including a work trip I did to Myanmar in November in the wake of a military coup to support brave Burmese human rights defenders leading the fight for access to justice. If my body holds up, my next planned work trip will take me to Afghanistan to support women judges and lawyers facing persecution from the Taliban. These journeys within my larger journey of illness are a key aspect of living my best and most meaningful life. And if some of you are wondering if my doctor was supportive of all this travel, I can say that he was, with the exception of one trip to Cusco, Peru, because it was at elevation. But when I came back with red blood cell counts that were higher than ever, he was delighted. So now I can do whatever I want. For me, the vistas offered by the cholangio journey, while sometimes only seen by walking the razor's edge of vertiginous cliffs, have helped me to appreciate that a shorter life of profound meaning has beauty that a longer life not deeply lived might lack. So I will end here with a thank you and an invitation. First, the thank you. To the doctors and researchers here today, and those who could not be here, thank you for the role that you play in alleviating the suffering that cholangiocarcinoma brings, and for having chosen to dedicate so much time in your life to this illness. And second, the invitation to us all. The 13th century poet Rumi said, "Through love, all pain will turn to medicine." I invite you to decide on, claim, and implement your own loving way, a way that will help make medicine of your pain. Knowing that for all of us, the journey to death is inevitable, what is the first step in your journey forward in this life? What is the most important thing you can choose to do, and with whom? What is the most important thing you can choose to say this year, this month, this very day? Thank you.